everyone, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm going to walk you through the steps I took to paint this pretty flower in the vase that you see here. And yeah, I hope you'll paint along with me. I start my sketch off on graph paper. I feel like it helps me to get the angles equivalent on each side or parallel on each side. And as you can see, I tend to do a lot of erasing with my sketches, so it's just good to start on a paper other than your watercolor paper, which can get damaged if you're spending too much time erasing. Here I was trying to work out getting the curve of each side of the vase parallel, and so I blocked off some, like the center, and then was trying to count the squares to make sure that I was, aligning each side in a similar way. And this is sort of the advantage of using the graph paper. I got the idea actually from doing some digital drawing on Procreate on my iPad. Procreate is an app that I like to use for drawing, and it has an option in the canvas to actually turn on grid lines, and it looks very similar to this. Of course, with it being digital, you can actually manipulate the size of the grid lines. So I like that strategy and or that application, and it helped me to actually think about some of my actual, hand-drawn strategies that I was using. And so here you can see I am going to trace what I have come up with onto some tracing paper, and this will allow me to transfer my sketch onto my watercolor paper. And also you can do some perfection. Oh, there's my cat watching me. You can perfect your drawing when you do that transfer, and I think that that's usually pretty beneficial for me as well. And I like to do the thing that you did when you were in elementary school, where you just sort of put some pencil on one side of it and then flip it over onto your watercolor paper and trace the whole thing, and voila, it's transferred. Okay, I mixed up a very watery blue-gray to serve as the base for my vase. So even though, or the base color for my vase, that's actually hard to say. So most things, even though this vase is going to be white, most things aren't like pure white. So I thought having sort of a bluish gray base will kind of approximate the white that you see in reality. And so my first step was to fill my vase with some clean water, and then I'm going to drop in my blue in just a second here. So here I am making sure that, my entire surface of my vase is wet, and I'm going to drop in some of this watery blue. This is called Wet into Wet. So I have, some water down on the vase, and, if you're a beginner, the paint will only go where the water is. So I'm going to focus mostly where I paint or drop in the water. I'm going to focus mostly on the sides and the bottom of the base, just to give it sort of a rounded appearance. And as if you're looking at it straight on, you'd kind of see more of the shadows on the bottom and the side. And I'm gonna mix up a pink for my flower, but I'll start with a very kind of creamier pink. Some artists aren't a fan of using white, but I really like that white watercolor paint gives me a really nice pastel-y effect. So I have some pink, I have some white, I'm using a lot of water here, and I also added a little bit of peach as well. Just to give it kind of a peachy pink color for my flower. And this is a very watery mix. So this is going to be the first layer that I put down of my flower, and I'll kind of build up the layers as I go. But with watercolor, you want to start with your lightest. You want to go basically light to dark. So your lightest colors will go on first because it's much easier to darken after the fact than to lighten up watercolor. So I'm going to mix up the blue that I'm going to use for the delicate blue florals and botanicals on the vase itself. And you can see I'm just mixing up a few different colors blue. I kind of wanted something that was like bright and pretty. And I also got a little bit of a darker pink, and I'm going in at the center of the flower to put in my stamen. Wherever the flower is the darkest is kind of where I've started here. I wanted to give the effect of petals, and I wanted to use the darker pink that I have here to create this sense of layers and layers of petals. So I do that by kind of creating the shadows. So I'm going in with varying degrees of thickness, and kind of just drawing in, or painting in, I should say, some sketchy lines, just to hopefully give the viewer the sense that there's all of these layers of petals on this flower. Okay, so I'm gonna let the flower dry for a little while, and I'm gonna let that sit there so that I can kind of maybe decide what I want to do next with the flowers. But while I'm thinking that through, I'm gonna work on my vase, and I'm just gonna draw a series of lines and various botanical shapes, like so leaf shapes coming off of the lines. I also chose to do some kind of messy flower look. And the really fun thing that I think about, the thing that I think is really fun, I should say, about patterns is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, not every leaf shape has to be perfect. It's just kind of the whole effect of seeing the pattern together. People's eyes don't really focus in on just, one thing or the imperfections. It's just kind of the overall effect. So I really like painting patterns because it lets me just kind of be creative and not have to be super perfectionist about it. I think I should add at this part too, especially if you're new to watercolor. One thing to think about is making sure that when you want precise lines, like you see me painting here, you want to make sure that the surface that you're painting on has completely dried. And depending on the watercolor paper that you use, it might take longer or shorter to dry. Usually the higher quality papers, the ones that are 100% cotton, which is what I'm painting on here, it takes a while to dry. And to dry completely. Now, if this wasn't dried completely, you would see these lines that I'm painting slowly kind of like seeping out. Depending on how wet the paper was, you'd see it kind of spreading out rather than, staying in one place. So just something to be mindful of, especially if you're a beginner, is, understanding the different effects depending on the wetness level of your paper. So I'm never quite sure how much people want to see of me painting an entire object. Like, I'm kind of doing some repetitive work here. You see I'm painting, leaf shapes and just various botanicals around these kind of curly little lines that I've painted already. And I kind of like to do a mix of small markings or small little leaves, and then some leaves are bigger, and I just kind of decide as I go what I like and what I feel like looks good. It's just kind of like a journey. I didn't really plan out how this vase was going to look. I just knew I wanted to do blue florals. So obviously anybody can adapt this to what they are interested in, painting, or what they think looks pretty. So I think I'm going to fast forward to the next step in my process, because I feel like this might get a little bit repetitive or boring to watch. The only other thing I would say is that I do try to make my vase look rounded in 3D by having, marks also going right up to the sides. Like, you can see some leaves that would be on the other side are kind of stretching onto the side of the vase that you can see. And that's just a way that I'm trying to make my vase look rounded and 3D and like there's another side to it. Okay, so we went forward in time a little bit. I finished my vase, and now I'm going to turn my attention back to my flower, and I'm painting in a stem, and I decided this flower looked a little kind of lonesome here. So I decided to also paint a bud, and I'm going to use a little bit of wet into wet action here. So you can see I've put down some green paint and the paint is still wet, and now I'm going to add a little bit of my sort of reddish, that was the same kind of reddish brown that I used for the stamen on the flower, and I think that would be the color of the bud. But I really like how the green and the red color sort of mixed, so it does legitimately look like what a bud looks like. And just to give it a little bit of balance, I wanted to do a little bit more botanicals on the other side, so I decided to paint in some leaves, some leaf shapes around my flower as well. And again, I'm gonna use the wet into wet technique. So one of my strategies for painting greenery like this is I like to start with a lighter green but vary the greens that I'm using. So I'll usually mix up a lighter kind of almost spring-like green, kind of one of those really like almost yellowy greens that you see there. And then I'll have like a darker, richer green, maybe more like an olivey green. And I like to drop in some of the darker, more olivey green onto the leaves, just to give it like a little bit more of a natural, more interesting look. And you'll also see I've kind of left in some white space on the leaves as well, where you might see a little bit of light reflection on them. And then I'm gonna paint a leaf underneath this flower, and I'll paint that leaf a little bit darker because I'm assuming or visualizing that my flower is going to cast a bit of a shadow on the leaf. So these are all sort of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm bringing my composition together. Okay, so now that I have finished the vase and the flowers, and everything has dried, so remember, you don't want your colors mixing or bleeding into each other. I decided I really wanted to make this pop by adding a background and a table in. So I just put a really, really watery mix, even lighter than what I started with for the vase, on my background. And you'll see too, I'm being careful as I paint around the flower and the leaves because it's watercolor. If you go over the existing paint, even though it's dried, with water, you can actually reactivate it, and then it would sort of blend in with what's around it. So you don't want that to happen. And I've mixed up a darker gray for my table, and I just think all these colors kind of are muted and they look really pretty together. And so there I am, being very careful painting my table. And I think I forgot to mention I put some washi tape down. That's what's lining the outside of my painting, and the watercolor won't seep past that, so I'll get like a nice clean edge with that. So I mixed up a little bit of a darker gray, and while my paint on my table there is still wet, I'm going to drop in that darker gray to create a shadow that the vase would be casting on my table. And the reason why I do it while the paper is still wet is because I just sort of want it to be a little bit of a fuzzier shadow. I don't want too hard of a line, which is what you would get if the paint was dry. Okay, and next comes the satisfying part of tearing off your washi tape, and you can see the nice clean lines there. And here's my final finished product from start to finish. I hope that this was helpful. I hope it's something that you want to try painting as well, and hopefully there were some things that you learned and some techniques that you'd like to try. For more watercolor content, please like and subscribe to this channel, and thanks so much for watching.